Basically, the movement of this universe that is kind of working on this axis point of contraction is helping us understand how our own organism also operates. And so when I became familiar with this information of how our universe is structured, then you look at the cellular structure of the body. And this is how I got into more research of how DNA is, even on the deepest level. Because originally my research was to kind of understand the history of life seeding on this planet. And all of that is a very important, integral part of understanding what's occurring here, okay, with ET contact, with the human evolution. But this helped me see a different perspective, which has to do with the organisms as well. And I want to kind of do an overview of all of those things. So finally, how our Earth is receiving these signals of information from the universe is like this. This is how we receive information as an entire organism is then fed into the galaxy. The sun takes that information and then spreads that information amongst its immediate galaxy, and each one of the planets is receiving that information as well. Now there's another element to this which has to do the substance of which everything is made out of. You know, we are familiar with dark matter, we're familiar with the center of the earth and plasma. And what I've realized with my research, and when I was beginning to present in the presentation this week, was talking about how we are biochemical structures. And from that perspective, are down to the chromosomes, which have their own torsional field, are creating this kind of a holographic projection based on what their oscillation, based on their movement as a structure, okay? And in this same way, everything is functioning, including the planets. What's important from this, and what is this biochemical substance that makes up not just our human bodies, but this entire universe, is very interesting, because it seems like this kind of a liquid substance that we are in. So our universe, that dark matter, is really something like a liquid substance. It's like a liquid substance. And that allows this information to move through the way that it does, okay? Now, each one of the planets has this kind of a center core that's made out of this plasmic substance as well. And the origin of this plasma is kind of occurring at the beginning of a conception of this massive universe, okay? And just the way light, I'm going to give you a picture so you can understand what I'm saying, goes through a prism and then fragments into a spectrum. In that same way, it seems like all of this information moves in that way. And the prism would be, for example, a dimension. So when it reaches a certain dimension, it'll split up into these segments, and they will help you understand what the basic structure of that dimension is, okay? And in this current three-dimensional timeline, for example, this information is being split, fragmented into the physical body, which I explained, and that holds up, for example, that rainbow structure that we have, the chakra system, where information is fragmented in the body. Okay? And in that same way, all information is fragmented on different levels. Now, the planets are also a depiction of this fragmentation within their particular galaxy. When information was first put in through the prism of this, each galaxy has its own torsional field as well. So when it comes into that torsional field, that information is fragmented within planetary, let's say it's divided into planets, it's manifested in planets. And the planets hold their own specific vibrational frequency with their own torsional field as well. So as I'm showing you, each one of those is kind of depicting, and that's why we have the concept of the planets with the, around the zodiac, with the different frequencies, or not necessarily frequencies, but the different energies that are kind of shifting and changing and modulating our reality here, and maybe even altering how we experience things. But everything in this multiverse is structured in that same way. It's fragments of information that are partitioned, and all of those play a certain role together to create this reality that we live in. So going back to these creators of Matrix that are residing in the center core of the planet, they understand how to work and utilize this information of each one of the planets. They understand that all the living organisms, for example, on this planet Earth, are functioning from the basic laws of the physics of that particular planet, the basic structure of, let's see, their minerals, like all the resources, the natural resources, the planet itself, okay? And so everything is built from that. And so the matrix that we call matrix, which is basically the structure of our reality, is built from there. The financial systems were built based on the mineral systems that we have, everything, of course, the economic system, everything from our, our cultures that are set up, the type of races that we have on our planet, all of that is set up to create a compartmentalized understanding of reality. And that goes everything from our sex, the definition of our sex, man and woman, how the men and women procreate, everything. So if you see that larger picture, then you look at, for example, our everyday lives and how we're living. Okay, we live in a society in which our everything is under a tremendous amount of control, from the perspective that we are taught how to think, how to feel, how to perceive everything from our brothers, our families, our sisters, the religion, and how religion plays a role in how we are starting to understand what we're experiencing in this reality. Okay, so all of these things, even our education, even the different languages that we speak on this planet, all of that is part and a result of what these matrix builders design very elaborately. So if you look at the evolution from mankind since Mesopotamia up until now, and all of the movements politically, financially that have been made from that time, everything has been curated, almost as if they were looking from the future to now, and for the future to then, all our ancient texts and ancient information that is depicted, for example, in the Alexandria Library, was showing all of that information. All of this that I'm talking about is something that was there. The structures of the structures of galaxies, planets, and this universe, because that's how you understand how reality can be manipulated from the inside out. So this is how it works. Now, if you look at the human body and what we're undergoing right now, we are being numbed down from multiple ways.
It's interesting that if you look at 5G, the frequencies that they're using will attack the mitochondrial DNA of our cells, absolutely, which attacks the very thing you're talking about.
Exactly, absolutely. And so that's another important fact to point out to understand this reality. From our food, which has been heavily genetically modified, basically destroyed in a sense where there is absolutely no nutritional value, even from our vegetables and fruits that we're eating, and then the rest we have is basically, junk food and all this stuff that are completely destructive for the human body. Then the pharmaceutical, which is the #1, grossing industry, okay? And so, and not only that, but based on our society and how our lives are led, which are constantly in this state of survival mode to continue to pay our bills, and the whole concept of, having to even survive, to have a family, the pressure of having the family. This pressure comes from either our social structure or religion. See, all of these things are created to put the human in a place where they feel completely disempowered, completely in a place where they feel helpless and like they're never catching up to the concept of success, which is again a product of this environment and the structures that have been created. Okay, everything from religion to all of this. So what we end up is with a gigantic culture, a gigantic society of humans that are sick, you know, physically, mentally, emotionally, on every level. On every level, we have the complete destruction of what we believe is family. And because we have such heavily ingrained structures of belief, the interesting mechanism that happens is when we have a very set way of thinking about what's right and wrong, the moment you start crossing over to the line of what's wrong based on your structure of belief, the body starts to come out of alignment, because now you are no longer obviously coming from a place of health and vitality. You're now feeling shame, guilt, so many different lower frequency emotions that are completely destroying your organism. And so this is a cyclical thing that is occurring to mankind, and this goes even further. I mean, all of these things that have been deployed on our planet to cause wars, to manipulate the race that needs to be put into wars, for example, into military. They have been not only chemically but psychologically programmed in order to be utilized for those agendas, for wars and for things like that.
Which races or which beings are you
Well,
referring to?
we're talking about, you know, America, all beings really that are, for example, in the military, have been very heavily programmed psychologically and mentally, you know, in order to fight in these wars. And we know that because, you know, the government has been doing experiments on the military for a very long time. You know,
I think this goes
on
back
mind
to
control.
Cara St. Louis did something on the King of Prussia, I think way back in the 1700s, not Russia but Prussia, pre-Germanic.
Yes.
And that methodology was used to train the school system and
yes.
the army.
It goes back, way back, way back. But also, I think the beginning of genetic modification also began, as you saw from my presentation, I mean, all the way back in the 40s and even more so, of humans, right? The genetic modification of humans, and none of that has been put out into mainstream, of course, because you saw recently what has been published from China, where they came up with the genetically modified twins that are now no longer, that are resistant to the HIV virus, and so they genetically tweaked that, and it created a gigantic uproar in the you know, scientific community. But again, you know, these things are kind of created that way to create a lot of fear and to create a lot of you know, reaction to these things. But
so can you explain ahead roughly what you want to pre-summarize or preface what you further want to talk about?
yeah, so ultimately what's occurring here is that the human is then becoming out of balance, completely sick. And so why I have understood all these things from the perspective of the information that I was shown, and as well how it affects the human body, is because I can see the multidimensional body. And what I've noticed is that the same structure that our human body holds, from the chakra system up to the energetic body, it's the exact same structure as this multiverse that we live in. And so that kind of helps us understand what it means to come into health. And so when I talk about the human body, it's almost as if a sponge that is receiving information from its surrounds, and all of that information that we are experiencing throughout our day is being programmed and recorded down to the cellular level of the body. And so this is very important, because this is how you begin to genetically modify someone. If you put them in an environment where everything is structured and curated in a way to keep them feeling a certain way and experiencing certain things, then of course they're going to be a product of that environment, and that's what we are. when we talk about consciousness and coming into a consciousness, breaking away from these patterns of belief, then we start to shift how we are experiencing our environment. And so this is where I come in to talk about how we can change that, how we can become masters of our body multidimensionally. Okay, and
I think you used the term epigenetics, which is a process, I think it's an accepted science now.
It is, finally, right? But we've known about this for 20 years now. And even before that, it was a part of research where we talked about how DNA is being rewritten based on its environment. Every cell, the proteins are being written based on the environment that's produced around the cell, which is very interesting. Because when we talk about, how we're experiencing our environment, everything that we're eating, to what we're feeling, to the stress that we're experiencing in our environment is being absorbed by the body, first from the skin, which is the largest organ that we have in the body, and that comes into the nervous system, and that information is fed into is organized here within the endocrine system. The endocrine system is connected to all of the organs, and that's how we start to process the information. But all of that is connected and managed by the main energy centers of the body, which is our chakra system. And so what happens here is when a human is born into this planet, into this dimension, we're talking about infinite consciousness as, let's say, the primordial life force. When that life force comes in through this multiverse, it comes in and is fragmented through the dimension. So as it comes in through this three-dimensional reality, like a prism, as I was mentioning before, that information is split up into these fragments and organized within the chakra system. So all of that. But not only does it connect to this physical body, we're also connecting to the DNA of the body. And that connects us to another system which is connected to this physical three-dimensional reality. Okay? So the three-dimensional reality is a product, again, of the environment that is controlled. And what we are connecting to is basically this DNA lineage, which is your ancestral lineage, of course. That's the information that your DNA is holding through your mitochondrial, right? And of course, you're talking about the true genes of your mother and your father. But what happens with mitochondrial DNA is that it's photocopied down. So it includes all the previous information from all the generations since the beginning of time. And what we're just starting to understand in our science today is how to read the parts of DNA that we're not aware of. We have now called that dark DNA because only 80% or only really a very small percentage of our DNA is transcribable to us. The rest of it is what they want to call, non-protein writing DNA. Okay, so it doesn't write proteins. So basically, they're saying that if there's DNA that's there, how is it creating your physical body if it's not actually creating the cells through writing of that DNA, through the writing of the protein? So
is that because the DNA sings? It's the whole DNA. It gives a certain harmonic structure.
That's very interesting, and yes, it does. That's a good way to put it, because what your DNA is basically the code of your system, of your organism, and that's going to give you the frequency that you are emitting. Okay, because that's all the information that's brought in from the soul structure, or that infinite primordial life force, connecting with the physical structure, which is connecting you to your ancestral lineage, which provides you with that genetic and frequency information. So what's going to happen is that this combination of information that is being brought into, let's say, my structure, I have the information from my father's lineage and my mother's lineage and their ancestors all the way since the beginning of time. But the information that we are playing out is normally these patterns, for example, of what do we call it? These patterns, and any kind of trauma that is brought down is being brought out based on the most recent genetic ancestors that we have, okay? And that's what we are playing out. So all of that is what we are filtering through our chakra system, through our experiences. But what's really interesting about this from the scientific perspective is that right now we believe that this dark DNA isn't a part of the actual, our structure. It doesn't play a role. But I mean, studies have shown that they did a lab test, for example, of rats, that when they deleted this sequence of dark DNA that doesn't provide protein writing information, these rats ended up with brain damage. Okay, so that is telling us that even though this DNA isn't writing actual proteins, it plays a very important role in the complete structure of the human. So that means that there is information that is being fed into us, into our genetic make, that we're not aware of. Okay?
Outside 3D must be outside the sort of chemical
exactly.
thing that these scientists rely on.
Exactly. And so this is where we start coming into the whole concept of holographic DNA, okay? In the sense that what that means is that if this DNA that is like this silent dark DNA that is providing and feeding important information to the structure of this organism, then there is a whole lot of information that we're not aware of, and that in those lineages are going to be holding on to information that's beyond this dimension that we're living in, of course, and even beyond that, okay? So the holographic DNA is coming from the perspective that as a biochemical organism, we are holographically creating everything. So even our cellular structure is a hologram. Even our brain is like this mechanism that is creating a projection. And so that helps us understand how in this dimensional reality, for example, we are co-creating and projecting. We have the concept of we live in a holographic reality. And this would explain how we are coming into this, how we are living in a holographic reality here.
But it would also explain if you had a predator or some other enemy that seems to be causing us problems. If it gets control of our ability to do what you just said, it can use us for its purposes.
Yes, and indeed this is exactly why I'm showing the structure of our whole structure of reality. Indeed it has, in a sense. Because if we have these organisms that create projections, but you are manipulating and controlling the projections that they're creating based on their environment, of course, we are living in a structured matrix per se. And so that's how we are creating here our reality in this world that we are sharing and experiencing things. But what I've noticed from the perspective of seeing a human and their multidimensional body, and in my healing work, is that not only am I finding fragments of themselves, because what happened is that when we are in this body, we are fragmented in this information. Our network connects us to our mother, our father lineage and all that. But we are information that is cyclically repeating itself over and over again. And what we see this because we are repeating patterns of programs that are of course negative programs over and over again. And what that causes us is to be stagnant within our concept of evolution, or even consciousness, even experiencing itself is limited in that sense, okay? So, and so how this would present itself is that the human not only is connected to what they're experiencing here and now, but when we go into the healing aspect of it and the aspect of integration, what has happened over all of those traumatizing experiences is actually the fragmentation of the human soul. And this is why I'm talking about these ancient rituals and practices that have been practiced on this planet for centuries, since the beginning of all kind of practices and rituals that are life-creating, since the beginning of time. And these rituals are processed in two ways, but the main point is the destruction and the fragmentation of the human soul. Okay, originally when we first started this, we talked about that orb, that gold, and the human soul, and how they were feeding off that life force. When you control that soul essence, that energy, then it provides this sustainable life force for these beings, which are in a sense utilizing all of these parts of reality. And in a sense, they, if you look at it from the perspective of consciousness, they are a rejection of consciousness. Because anything that requires feeding off anything else is a parasite. It becomes a parasitic dynamic, because they require some other external thing to provide its life force, life support. And this is the structure of this reality that we live in. And we see that with all of these traces and how the exchange of information is between consciousness here. Now, these rituals that are practiced, that are a very integral part to the matrix that we live in, which is the fragmentation of the human soul. How does the soul become fragmented? It becomes fragmented through trauma. It becomes fragmented through the destruction of divine feminine and creation energy, which is sexual energy. And it is destructed by fragmenting and compartmentalizing all aspects of belief. So what happens is that, just like dissociative disorder in psychology, a person has different personalities. In that same way, our soul is being fragmented, and that in a sense can explain how we have different multiple lifetimes. Okay. So what ends up happening is that you have this human soul, generation of soul, that has all of these fragments around it within multiple dimensional timelines, because we live in a multiple dimensional reality. And these timelines are actually all happening simultaneously right here, right now. So this is why I believe regression works, because when we are regressed, we are accessing different parts of our consciousness which are fragmented in different timelines. But really, there are things that are all occurring here. They're all available to you in this present moment. And not only that, but what you will notice is that sometimes in regression you recognize relatives that you are familiar with in this timeline from other past experience stories of your life. And we are cycling through these same patterns in our lineages, in these networks that have been now created on this planet. And these networks are connecting you to your family, family. And that is basically a network of consciousness, which is it becomes magnetically attracted to each other based on frequency, based on the experiences that this particular network is cycling through. Okay, in other words, you know what I mean?
This is amazing, and we'll have to continue this in a session 2.
Yes, yes.
And it's absolutely huge, and to think that this involved some kind of ET situation.
Absolutely.
It always keeps coming back, or extra-dimensional or something.
Yes.
Well, Geraldine, that's wonderful. Thanks for now, and we'll continue next time.
Thank you so much for having me.